Hi everyone, this is Alexander Lim and welcome to AuthorStory, where on every episode we speak to a different author in a particular topic of interest. So on today's episode is Lisa Rehurek, the author of the RFP Success book, and you can check it out right now by clicking on the Amazon link in the video description below. As for Lisa herself, she has held several corporate positions for over 2 decades and has founded or co-founded 5 businesses. She is presently the CEO of the RFP Success Institute and is dedicated to helping people create the proper foundations to get them to wherever it is they need to go. So, Lisa, welcome and thanks for being on Author Story. Okay, so Lisa, first off, what made you decide to write the RFP Success book?
Well, in my business, I help small businesses respond to what's called an RFP, and we can talk a little bit more about what that is. But as I work through this with my different clients, there's some themes that occur over and over and over, and I thought, I keep writing these down, and I keep writing blogs about them or doing videos about them, and there's so many different tips.
Right?
It just seemed to flow pretty simply into, hey, let's put this into a book and give it out to people to help them be more successful.
Okay, so it seems like there was a single moment and you realized, this should go into a book.
Yes, most definitely. I think as business owners, we have so much information and so many great experiences and tips and pieces of information to share with business owners.
Right?
It's really great when we can take all of that information and culminate it into a book that
Right.
can be accessible to almost everybody.
Right. Okay. Cool. Cool. So, Lisa, let's get a little bit to brass tacks and definitions here. So,
Okay,
an RFP is essentially a request for proposal, is it not?
that is correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So, I'm sure there are those out there among our listeners who aren't aware of what an RFP is. So, can you give us a short thumbnail sketch of what it's all about and what it's used for?
Yep, absolutely. So almost all government entities and many large corporate entities, when they're looking for business, when they're looking to hire a vendor or a contractor for any kind of business, they do that through an RFP, a request for proposal, as you said. So they release this document asking for people, for other businesses to submit a proposal for a defined business need.
Mhm.
And they can be very short, or they can be very long, and they can be very arduous. But
Mhm.
the business that wants to do business with that government entity or that corporate entity has to respond to this request for proposal
Mhm.
and submit their requirements and their experience and their solution in
Mhm.
order for then that government or corporate entity to grade, if you will, those different proposals and
Mhm.
choose the best contractor.
Right, right. So essentially, I mean, there's a lot that goes into an RFP. Then it's not just like, hey, we've got this bidding for this project, and what can you give us? I mean, this could get rather technical.
Yeah, they can get very, very technical. I've done some RFPs that have been, 5 pages long, and I've done some that have been 500 pages long. So it
Wow.
depends on, yeah, it depends on the nature of the business,
Mm-hmm.
the longevity of the business, the
Mm-hmm.
price point. I'll give you an example. I just earlier this year helped a company bid on a $60 million RFP.
Wow.
So yeah, they can be crazy, and they can be really really hard to respond to because there's a lot of very specific requirements. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of questions that you have to answer, and you've got to pay attention because you can also very easily get disqualified if you don't pay attention to those requirements.
Right. Okay. So, like, what are some of the other requirements? I mean, we touched on technical. What are the other requirements that are requested for companies in an RFP?
Yeah, so there'll be the technical expertise, right? So
Mm-hmm.
the specifications around your solution that you provide, and it can be anything from cleaning supplies to consulting services to pharmacy benefits. You would be shocked at how many different types of business there are out there. But in the requirements, then there are also things like legal requirements and insurance
Mm-hmm.
requirements. Then they'll tell you, some RFPs will tell you what they want the margins in your response to be in the font.
Mm-hmm.
You have to put things on recycled paper. You've got to get it submitted by a very specific date and time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you miss that, you'll get disqualified, which is heartbreaking.
Right.
So, the requirements can be pretty intense.
Right. And I mean, with an RFP, then I mean, the responding company, you need a lot of folks to handle, particularly if there's a lot of requirements. You need a lot of folks to handle the response to these things, don't you?
You do, yes. And so there's big companies that do this a lot. Like, um, let's say there's a healthcare company.
Mm-hmm.
They probably respond to a lot of RFPs, and they would have an RFP team in-house,
Mm-hmm.
people that are specifically hired to respond to all of the proposals that come in the door for them. And then
Right.
there are other smaller businesses, which is my sweet spot, which is why I have a business,
Mm-hmm.
because there's smaller companies that, they bid on maybe six to 8 to 10 a year, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't require them to have a full-time proposal staff in-house, but then they're looking at their technical subject matter experts to write RFPs, and that's when they bring somebody in like me to help support that effort and make sure they're, meeting the requirements and writing appropriately and all of that kind of stuff. But it
Right.
can, and that's another reason for the book, Alex, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
you've got all these people out there that they're not proposal experts,
Right.
they're
Right.
subject matter experts, right? And the
Right.
book is aimed at helping them get better at learning how to respond better, because it can be a big effort. If you can imagine, let's say, just a 300-page RFP,
Mm-hmm.
which is not out of this question, out of the, that's not unusual, but that's a lot of effort and time put in, and then to lose that bid
Yeah.
is a hard pill to swallow.
Right. Right. Okay. And I believe you've been on both sides of the I don't know, both sides of the coin when RFP is concerned. And I mean, you've been someone who's submitting the RFP. I mean, that's your business right now. And
Yep.
I'm sure you've also been on the examiner side. The guy who asks for the proposals. So
Yes.
what? Let's talk first about the person who's submitting a proposal. From
Okay.
what should they be looking for? What should they be watching out for when they submit a proposal?
Yeah, a few key things. Number one, of course, all those requirements that we just talked about.
Yeah.
Making sure that you've got somebody that has that attention to detail, that is really focusing their time and attention on making sure that the requirements are met.
Hmm.
The other thing is the evaluation criteria.
All right.
So most of the time in an RFP, they will lay out how they're going to evaluate the proposal and um, what they're going to be paying attention to and what they're going to be scoring on. That's very important. And
Mm.
then this is going to sound crazy, but you got to pay attention to the questions that are being asked. And the reason I say that is the number one mistake people make in responding to RFP, other than, yeah, maybe it's the number two mistake, because the number one mistake is missing the requirements. But number two
Mhm.
is that they don't actually answer the question the way that it's asked. And so
Mhm.
they get a little bit in their head, and a lot of time responders just start talking about themselves too much,
All
and
right.
they get on their soapbox, and they don't actually ask the question as it's been asked. And so they need
Mm.
to pay attention to that, and then not overwhelm with too much information. Answer the question, give them what they want, but don't go overboard and give them everything that you can possibly do for them.
All right. Okay. Well, just for sake of clarity, for sake of example, can you give us an example of the sort of thing where a question is asked and then it's not directly answered or too much information is given?
Yeah, absolutely. So they might ask a question like, tell us your methodology for XYZ. When I say
Okay.
XYZ, it's like a very specific task. Tell us
Right.
your methodology.
Mm-hmm.
And they might go into 10 pages of their history and how great the company is. And I see
Uh-huh.
this all the time. They'll start talking about, we were founded in 1972 and we've got 86, clients, and $60 million in revenue, and we're fantastic, and yada yada yada. But they're
Right.
not talking about the methodology.
Mm.
Another example is that a lot of times they'll ask a multi-tiered question. So
Mm-hmm.
they'll ask, tell us about, map out your pricing at a high level in these 6 categories. And
Mm-hmm.
then the second part of that question will say, underneath that, please provide the detail for that pricing.
Mm-hmm.
And more times than not, somebody will miss the second part of that question.
Mm.
Yeah. And Alex, the interesting thing is this is nothing more than a sales opportunity, right? This is like
Yes.
a written sales call. So
Yeah.
you've got to pay attention to what the client is asking for and what the client needs and wants.
Mm.
And if you can do that and stay focused on that, you're really ahead of the game.
Right, right. Okay. So on the other side of the coin, the guy who's looking over the RFP, or in your case, the woman who's looking over the RFP, what would you be looking for? What would you looking for in terms of a submission?
Yeah, similar things. And before I answer that, I just want to say one of the things that I tell my clients all the time is to remember that there is a human being on the other side of this RFP, on the other side of your response,
Mm-hmm.
reading these things because we
Mm-hmm.
get a little bit stuck in our head about, writing to the RFP and it can get really boring. So when you're thinking about the person on the other end, remember that they're human and that they have to read this thing. Because when I'm reading responses, if they're too boring, I'm human and I'm going to trail off and start,
Right,
making my grocery list in my head or whatever that is because I'm
right.
bored.
Uh-huh.
So that's one thing that I look for. Are they piquing my interest? Number two, can they really provide the solution? And
Mm-hmm.
if they provide too much fluff
Mm-hmm.
around that and I can't clearly see what their solution is,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm not going to score them very high. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to Don't make it too hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third thing, and this is one of the number one things that I hear from other buyers and evaluators,
Right.
is that, again, answer the question. Like, it's really hard to evaluate a proposal when somebody has not really answered the question the way that I have written it.
Mm.
And
Okay.
obviously, then I'm also looking at the requirements being met.
Right, right. Okay. So, I mean, given all the, I know how to put this, all the things that can go wrong with an RFP, in your experience, what's the percentage of RFPs that that flop, that fail, fail to address a potential customer's concerns?
Wow, that's a big question. I would say easily 50% of them
Wow.
uh, fail to impress. I mean, from a requirement standpoint, probably not that high. Like,
Uh huh.
if you talk about the ones that just flat out get disqualified, maybe it's
Right.
10 to 20%.
Uh
But the
huh.
ones that fail to showcase that they've got a real solution and that it's the solution that I need, I would
Right.
say probably 50% of them.
Uh huh.
Yeah.
That's that's a lot of lost opportunity when you think about it. I mean, and
Yes.
some of these RFPs are for like what, millions of dollars?
Millions of dollars, and not only that, Alex, but they're for years, like a
Mm,
3-year contract or a 5-year contract.
mm.
If you think about all of the construction that is done by the federal government or the state government,
All right.
almost all of that construction, just as an example, has to go through a bidding process. They've got
Right.
to go through an RFP, and some of those contracts are huge.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it very easily, you can put a lot of time and effort. You can wait for years for an RFP to come out.
Mm-hmm.
Finally get it. You spend a month or 2 months responding to it,
Mm-hmm.
all this manpower, and then
Yeah.
you make one little mistake and you're out. Or you fail to impress and you
Mm-hmm.
go to the bottom of the pile and you lose. It can be heartbreaking.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, some of these requirements, I mean, they can be detailed. I mean, I remember reading an article like when they were asking for, I suppose, RFPs to reconstruct the Pentagon. Like the requirements for that ran into the thousands of pages. So
Yes,
highly detailed
yes.
stuff.
Exactly. The federal government ones are insane, and I don't deal with the federal government RFPs just because it's a whole other unique thing. I work mostly with corporate and then state and local RFPs, which can be big enough in and of themselves. But those federal ones, you're right, they can get kind of crazy.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, so a company, a contractor, they've really got to be on the top of the game if they want to get this guy as a client.
Yeah, they do. And to that point, is it's not just about your technical expertise,
Hmm.
right? You've got to learn how to sell in a written document because there are these kind of underlying currents that you've got to make sure you're kind of putting in the RFP in your response. You've got to make sure that you're showcasing your differentiators and that your response makes me, the buyer,
Hmm.
whoever that is, right, say, "Oh my gosh, this company's standing out." How are you going to stand out? It's marketing, kind of
Right,
marketing 101, right?
right. So this isn't an RFP isn't just a technical document. Then it's also sales. It's also marketing. That's aspect has to be involved in this as well.
Yes, most definitely. Most
Wow.
definitely. And people miss that because, again, if you think about those small businesses that I was talking about that don't have professional proposal teams, they've
Yes.
got a technical subject matter expert that doesn't know how to market. They don't really know how to sell.
Right.
No fault of their own. That's not their expertise. So
Yeah.
you've got to have that blended ability to take their technical speak and turn it into something that is readable for the evaluator, because that's another thing. The evaluators probably don't have the same level of technical expertise
Right.
that
Right.
technical writers might have.
Uh
And
huh.
then, yeah, and then adding that sales and marketing spin, if you will,
Right.
subtly to make yourself stand out and win the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And I mean, this stuff is. I mean, we've touched on this several times this interview, but this stuff's very important for a company. No RFPs, no submissions, no sales, and no
Yep,
business. No
exactly.
business.
Yes,
Gosh.
exactly.
All
So
right. So,
for some businesses, I mean, I have clients that it's their whole sales strategy. Their
hmm.
whole strategy is government contracting, and so they have to, all of their sales is done via RFPs.
Hmm.
So that can be intense.
Wow. Okay. So I'm just curious. What usually how long does it take for an RFP to be, to be approved? I mean, you mentioned maybe it may take something like years for the federal government, right? But how about private companies?
Well, so it can take. Generally, what happens is they'll release an RFP.
Hmm.
There will be a timeline for you to respond,
Hmm.
anywhere between 2 weeks and sometimes a couple of months. But generally, I'd say 4 weeks is kind of an average for you
Right.
to prepare your response.
Right.
And then, yeah, they can sit on it for a while. I mean, I know some government contracts that 3, 4, 6 months,
Hmm.
where it takes them a while to evaluate and then choose the final vendor. So then you're also in this waiting game,
Right.
um, waiting to find out if you got made the cut.
Right.
Frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, this also plays. This also is. I mean, the companies, the contractors' management has to keep an eye on this because I mean, if they have like something like 10 RFPs they send out, then they accept an RFP from the business of one buyer, and then the other buyer agrees to do business with them, and they can't cover the resources. I mean, this does have an impact on how the business is
Yeah.
run.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for companies that get a lot of their business, let's say well, any amount of business, but at least 50% or more of their business is via RFPs. I mean, there is a management to, or there's a management to keeping track of what you're responding to and where your resources sit and how many
Yeah.
resources you have. And if you haven't heard from, XYZ RFP yet and you're getting ready to respond to another one, are you going to have the resources if you win them both?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I mean, that's part of managing the business and part of the overall business development strategy within that company for sure.
Right, right. So this is, I mean, we can just say that RFP is a sales document, but really, it's got enormous impact on the company.
Enormous impact on the company, absolutely. And think about the one that I mentioned earlier that was a $60 million RFP, like, or
Right.
opportunity, right?
Yeah.
That's if you win that, you better have the staff to pull it off. And if
Right.
you lose that, um, you might have to get rid of staff
Right.
or find other opportunities. So there are huge implications for sure.
Right. Right. Definitely. Definitely. Okay, so Lisa, let's say you come across someone. I'm this is your business, so this question is in aligned with your business. But let's say you came across someone tasked with creating an RFP. Guy has sufficient technical know-how to do so, but this is first time ever to create one or respond to one. Sorry, and you only
That's,
have enough time to tell that person one thing about how to do so. What would be that one thing you'd tell that person?
ooh, good question. I would tell them this is kind of going to be twofold, but I would tell them to really pay attention to answering the question as it was asked and
Mm-hmm.
be as simple and succinct as possible in answering that question.
Mm. So no 10-page replies here.
Right. Because again, there's a human being on the other side of this that's probably reading at least three, if not
Mm-hmm.
maybe five or 10
Uh-huh.
responses from companies.
Mm.
And how are you going to make yours stand out? You know, Alex, if you think about like a traditional marketing statistic, which is we have 2 to 3 seconds to make an impression on somebody these days,
Right, right.
somebody's going to make a judgment on your response in the first couple of seconds. How are you
Right.
going to make that impression? If you're too fluffy, if you're too technical, if you're too long, they're just going to glaze over. They've got other things to do. So, you know, that I focus on that in the answer, which is all about the writing itself. You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's a whole other side of the coin, which is the process to responding.
Right.
And, you know, so when you asked that, I was like, oh, you know, I could have gone that way too. But I
Uh-huh.
think, you know, obviously paying attention to the requirements is important. And there's so much that's important, right? But I
Right.
think really paying attention to that question to make the impression on the reader is super important.
Right. Okay. Cool. Got that. Okay. So, Lisa, in the last minute or so of this interview, are there any words of wisdom you'd like to share to, inspire listeners, particularly those who have a business of their own?
Yeah, you know, I would say specific to RFPs, um, you know, don't let them intimidate you and just make sure you get the help you need. You know, you can hire people like me, of course, but you can also, you know, find other people, you know, hire part-time people, find somebody else in your company to give an objective viewpoint of it. Don't try to do it all by yourself is really
Mm.
what it comes down to because these, especially when we're talking about small businesses, which is my sweet
Yes.
spot, you know, they try to do it all themselves and
Mm.
it's just you're going to be beating your head against a wall. And that kind of goes to everything in business. Stop trying to do it all yourself and get help where you need it. You can get really creative with the help you need if you don't have a budget. Interns, part-timers, things like that.